there's a saying in Vaishnava literature, it's like the dwarf trying to touch the moon. So these are two great personalities. I was not anticipating to be able to speak today. We were going to have a special speaker for today's session because besides it being such a a special occasion in terms of the Sankirtan team, this is a special occasion because it's a milestone in terms of a campaign we're running, which I shall speak about a bit later. And our dear Sankirtan leader, His Grace Divyanam Prabhu, requested I speak. So I'll speak today something about Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and Sri Gadadhar Pandit. And I'll also speak on the request of Divyanam Prabhu, the significance of Srimad Bhagavatam, both in the lives of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and Sri Gadadhar Pandit. And I'll also do a short presentation at the end, reaching out to whoever has not yet heard of the campaign that we're running, especially for this culminating in today's event, and tell you a bit about it. So thank you very much. And I thought we'll start today's session by reciting two verses. The first verse is from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in glorification of Sri Gadadhar Pandit. And the second verse is the Pranam Mantra for Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur. So we'll first read from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya Leela, 7th chapter, text 164. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So we're reading from Antya Leela. Pandite Prabhura Prashada Kahana Nayaya Gad Daira Gauranga Bhali Yanre Loka Loke Gaya. Word for word synonyms. Pandite, upon Gadadhar Pandit, Prabhura of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Prasada, mercy, Kahana na yaya, no one can explain. Gadhaira, Gauranga, the Gauranga of Gadadhar Pandit, Bali as Yanre, whom, Loke Gaya, people say. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. No one can say how merciful the Lord is to Gadadhar Pandit, but people know the Lord as Gadhaira Gauranga, the Lord Gauranga of Gadadhar Pandit. So that's a beautiful verse in glorification of Sri Gadadhar Pandit, and we'll speak a bit later more about the significance of this verse. And I would like to now move on to the second verse we would recite today, which is the Pranam Mantra for Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur. Namo Bhaktivinodhaya Sachidananda Namine Gaura Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate. Translation. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Nandana Bhaktivinoda, who is transcendental energy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He is a strict follower of the Goswamis, headed by Sri Rupa. So a beautiful Pranam Mantra, which captures some very important qualities of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur. So Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he appeared on this planet in the year 1908. And sorry, not 1908. He was born on September 2nd, 1838, in a village near Bir Nagar, near Navadvip. And his father, Bir Chandradat, was a great devotee of Lord Nityananda. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he left this planet on June 23rd, 1940, in Jagannath Puri, and on the disappearance day of Sri Gadadhar Pandit. And it's quite significant that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur left on this particular day, and we will speak a little bit more about that later. So Srila Prabhupada, one of the first books he published was the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And in the beginning pages of the book, Srila Prabhupada had the pictures, the black and white pictures of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Gokishore Das Babaji Maharaj, and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And under the photograph of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there was a caption: the pioneer of the program for benedicting the entire world with Krishna consciousness by the instructions of Lord Chaitanya. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is known as the pioneer of the Krishna consciousness movement. Now, some people may say that it was Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who pioneered the Krishna consciousness movement. So why is it that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is designated with the title of the pioneer of the Krishna consciousness movement? It is because Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is the pioneer of the modern Krishna consciousness movement. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared in the early 1500s. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu established Krishna consciousness throughout India. But after the disappearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Krishna consciousness movement gradually fell into disrepute. The Gaudiya Vaishnavas, the Gaudiya Vaishnava culture became permeated by various upper sampradayas. And these upper sampradayas, they misconstrued the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and they, became sahajas. Prabhupada explained the meaning of sahaja is one who takes things cheaply. So the Gaudiya Vaishnavas at that time did not have a particularly good reputation. And it is Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur who re-established the Vaishnava culture of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And not only re-established it, but he propagated it. There's a very famous Gaudiya Vaishnava scholar by the name of Joseph T. McConnell. And Joseph T. McConnell once wrote a paper called Institutionalizing Prema. And in this paper, he writes that there are two types of Vaishnava institutions. The first institution is the hard institution. That's the bricks and the mortar, the temples, the centers, and so on. And then he says there's actually the second type of Vaishnava institution, and that's the soft institution. And he writes that the soft institution is the Gaudiya Vaishnava literatures. And he says of the two institutions, the hard institution and the soft institution, the more prominent, the more important institution in the Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage is the soft institution, the Gaudiya Vaishnava literatures. And Srila Prabhupada, he made a particular point when he once said that, a time may come when all the temples in ISKCON fail. A time may come where the devotees of ISKCON may fail. But Prabhupada said that this Krishna consciousness movement will continue on the basis of the books that he left behind. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's contribution in terms of the Vaishnava culture, and it is very vast. His contribution is not so much in that he established many temples. He also did not print in one sense and distribute many books, but he laid the foundation for the Vaishnava culture in his writings. And he was a prolific writer. In the approximately 76 years he was on this planet, he wrote over 100 books. And each of these books, Srila Prabhupada says, they are equivalent to any of the Vaishnava literatures, or the Shastras, the Vedas, the Vedanta Sutras, or anything. These are Dharma Shastras, the writings of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his vision for the Krishna consciousness movement was beyond estimation. We know in the life of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had predicted that Prithiviti Achayatin Nagaradigram Savatra Prachar Aiva Mora Nam, that in every town and village, in every country of the world, my name will be preached. So although Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made this prediction more than 500 years ago, even his followers sometimes felt that, how will this prediction ever be fulfilled? They were bewildered by it. And some of them even tried to take an abstract interpretation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's prediction. But Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had faith in the order and desire of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And through his books, he began the work of spreading Krishna consciousness and the holy name throughout the world. And in particular, in the year 1896, and we all know 1896 is a very significant year. It's the year that Srila Prabhupada appeared on this planet. He wrote a book called the Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, His Life and Precepts. And he distributed these books throughout the world. He printed them and he sent them to various libraries. And many devotees, many years later, when Srila Prabhupada established Krishna consciousness, they would go to different libraries and they would discover these books that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had printed and sent. And he also had the vision of Krishna consciousness for the future. And he wrote, very soon, the unparalleled path of Harinam Sankirtan will be propagated all over the world. He foresaw the day when Vaishnavas from all over the world would come to Mayapur and chant Jai Sachinanda together with the Bengali Vaishnavas. And he actually predicted the appearance of Srila Prabhupada through these predictions. And he said, oh, for that day when the fortunate English, French, Russian, German, and American people would take up banners, mridangas and kartals, and raise kirtan to their streets and towns. When will that day come? Oh, for the day when the fair-skinned men from the other side chanting Jai Sachinandan Ki Jai will extend their arms and embracing devotees of our country coming from our side and treat us with brotherly feelings. When will that day be? And he wrote this in an article in Sajjana Toshani. And his vision of the Krishna consciousness movement was also further extended in his vision of the new Mayapur temple, the temple of the Vedic planetarium. Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he had a house in Godroma Dweep, across the Jalangi River from present-day Mayapur, where we have our ISKCON center. And one day he was sitting on his balcony, and he looked across the river, and he had a vision of an effulgent city, an effulgent temple, which he called the Adbhuta Mandir. And he desired that the wonderful temple and splendorous city should come into existence. And he predicted that this city, from this city, Krishna consciousness would spread throughout the world. So Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he was indeed the pioneer of the Krishna consciousness movement, and he had the vision of how Krishna consciousness would spread throughout the world. In terms of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's own coming into Krishna consciousness, we understand that Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur is an eternal associate of the Lord, is a Nitya Siddha. Srila Kavi Karnapur writes that in the spiritual world, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur is Kamala Manjari. The Manjaris, we understand, are to be the closest associates of Srimati Radharani. They do not have practically no contact they have with the Lord. Their service is through Srimati Radharani. So Bhaktivedanta Thakur is an eternal associate of Srimati Radharani in the spiritual world, and is descended for the purpose of propagating Krishna consciousness. And Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, we know from the lives of the Vaishnavas, they appear on this planet, and sometimes they may take some time before they start their mission. So Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, from the age of 12, he was educated by his grandfather, and he used to help his grandfather edit a magazine on Hinduism. And through this editing, he became very knowledgeable in both writing and printing and in the English language. And Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he wanted to propagate the spiritual culture of India, of Bharatvash. But he saw that there were many teachers, but no one was really propagating something that caught his attention. And Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur then encountered the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And when he encountered the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was about 21 years at that point in time. And he became very attracted to the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And for the first time, he felt that this was a knowledge and a culture that should be propagated, and should be propagated not only through India, but throughout the world. And then he wanted to find a copy of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. He wanted to understand more about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But the more he looked, the more it seemed that the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita evaded him. And for 6 years, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he would look for the Vaishnava literatures, and he wouldn't find them. Eventually, he received a copy, almost at the same time, of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And it was there that he writes that the seed of devotion was planted in his heart. And I'd just like to read one extract where he writes from his autobiography. He says, from this time meaning when he received Chaitanya Charitamrita and Srimad Bhagavatam, my respect and reverence for Sri Chaitanya Dev was born. That seed of faith for the Vaishnava Dharma, which was implanted within my heart, soon sprouted. Now I love to study the Shastras dealing with Krishna, both day and night. And he writes that at this time his heart became pained, he would incessantly submit his prayers to Lord Krishna on the strength of devotion, having received the mercy of the Lord. So this was the turning point of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He immersed himself in both the Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. And being a householder, being a magistrate, he had great responsibilities. But despite these responsibilities, he started to write prolifically on the Vaishnava literatures. And if we go through the list of writings and the timeline by which he wrote the various literatures, it's truly astounding. But I just want to touch, because of the request of Divyanam Prabhu, on Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and his connection with the Srimad Bhagavatam. And shortly after he received the Bhagavatam, he began to speak on the Bhagavatam, and he wrote a paper called the Bhagavat. And in this paper, it was very interesting what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote. It's interesting because both in respects of how contemporary people see the Bhagavatam, and also often how we ourselves as devotees feel about the Bhagavatam, and especially the propagation of Srimad Bhagavatam. Many of us, consider that Srimad Bhagavatam is really for the community of Vaishnavas. And even within the community of Vaishnavas, there are many devotees or early sadhakas that feel that Bhagavatam is too voluminous. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes in this paper, he says the Bhagavat is undoubtedly a difficult work. And where it does not relate to a picturesque description of traditional and poetical life, its literature is stiff, and its branches are covered in the garb of an unusual form of Sanskrit poetry. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he almost takes on the position of a contemporary person. And he says, when he was in college, he was very accustomed to reading the philosophical works of the West and exchanging thoughts with thinkers of the day. And he writes that he almost contracted a hatred towards the Bhagavad. And he writes that the great work seemed like a repository of ideas, scarcely adapted to the 19th century. And we waited till hear any argument in its favor. To us, then, a volume of Channing, Parker, Emerson, or Newman had more weight than a whole lot of Vaishnava works. And he writes, greedily we pored over the various commentations of the Holy Bible and of the labors of the Tattva Bodhinisabha, containing extracts from the Upanishads and Vedanta, but no work of the Vaishnavas had any favor for us. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, almost in this paper, he paraphrases, both the contemporary world and sometimes even within the community of devotees, where there seems to be an attraction, to ponder of the work of, Western scholars and so on, rather than dive into the Bhagavatam itself. And in this book, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur beautifully writes, having first portrayed this thought of the contemporary persons about how the Bhagavatam is so relevant, even for the 19th century, and how Bhagavatam can change the world. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had the vision of Srimad Bhagavatam making an impact on the world. And he also wrote a wonderful book on Srimad Bhagavatam, which is called the Srimad Bhagavat Tarka Marichi Mala, which is the garland of verses sewn by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And the meaning of this book, the title Sri Bhagavat Marichimala, it means a garland of rays from the sun like Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this book, he writes that how Srimad Bhagavatam, we can see Srimad Bhagavatam explains the path of Sambandha Gyan, Abhideya Gyan, and Prayojan Gyan. And he extracts verses from the writings of Srila Baladev Vijibhushan. And then he takes the readers through various verses of the Bhagavatam, of how we can see through the Bhagavatam the journey it takes us through. And this verse has been studied by many contemporary and Vaishnava scholars, and they deem this works of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur to be, one of the most profound explanations of Bhagavatam. In his introduction to the book, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur writes, he says, when I was preparing this book, Swarup Damodar appeared in my heart and told me, by the order of Mahaprabhu, arrange Srimad Bhagavatam slokas in gradual sequence to show Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan. By the mercy of the Lord, the Vaishnavas will daily read this book, which consists of verses from Srimad Bhagavatam. And in conclusion, with great humility, he writes, the garland of verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, sown by Bhaktivedanta Thakur, who is always absorbed in ecstatic love for Shri Gaura and Gadadhar, is now complete. Those devotees who blissfully relish this book daily will certainly obtain the mercy of Shri Radha Madhav. Shri Radha Madhav has appeared in Shri Navadvip in Goda Mandal, along with the abode Raja as Shri Gadadhar Gaura, and they have performed the eternal pastimes in a different manner. So Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur has written this book in glorification of Srimad Bhagavatam, and it was Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's desire that Srimad Bhagavatam be spread, far and wide, in according with the desires of the previous acharyas and Srila Vyasadeva. So Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he also had a very special relationship with Shri Gadadhar. And in his ashram, or his place abode in Navadvip, he installed the deities of Shri Gaura Gadadhar. And he compiled 3 verses, particularly in glorification of Shri Gadadhar. And he wrote, as I behold the wondrous arti of my Lords Gaura and Gadadhar, I enter into the mood of their existence previous to appearing in Nadia. It is simply indescribable. And he wrote further, O my most youthful Lord Gaur Kishore, when you will be merciful and show me thus, stealing my mind with the forest of Godrum. Within the grove of Ananda Shukala Kunj, you stand with Shri Gadadhar on your left, radiating the effulgence of pure gold with beautiful curling hair. You are wearing the fine dress of a dramatic actor. In an instant, Shri Radha Madhav will appear and brilliantly illuminate the entire scene, accompanied by all of their confidential friends and associates. They will dance with their necks decorated with various types of golden necklaces. And Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, this is a bit esoteric, and I will try not to delve too deeply into it because it's firstly beyond my comprehension as a sadhaka. But Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur explained that Gaur Gadadhar are non-different from Radha and Krishna. And a sadhaka in the beginning worships Gaur Nitai in the mood of Harinam Sankirtan. And the devotees, as they advance, then they worship Gaur Gadadhar in the mood of Prema Sankirtan. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has written more about this, but for now I would not speak about that too much. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur also wrote a wonderful song, which was, I think we have some stanzas, 2 stanzas I've copied. Shri Godruma Chandra Bhajano Padesh. And in this song, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes in the 2nd verse, Dana Yovana Jivana Raja Sukham Nahi Nityam Anupshana Nashaparam Tajagramya Kata Shakalam Vipalam Bhaja Godruma Kanana Kunja Vidham. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes, material riches, youth, a long life, and royal happiness, none of these are certain. At every moment, they are being destroyed. Give up all useless mundane conversations and just worship the beautiful moon of Godrum's forest bowers. And then in his concluding verse, he writes, Smara Gora Gadhadara Keli Kalam Bhava Gora Gadhadara Pakshachara Shrinu Gora Gadhadara Charukatam Bhaja Godruma Kanana Kunja Vidham. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he concludes this beautiful song with this stanza. He says, just remember the artistically playful pastimes of Gaura and Gadadhar. Just become a loyal follower of Gaura and Gadadhar's camp. Just listen to the captivating stories of Gaura and Gadadhar, and just worship the beautiful moon of Godrum's forest bowers. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur reveals in this verse the importance of the worship of Gaur Gadadhar. And he says, by the worship of Gaur Gadadhar, one becomes free of all material entanglements, and one very quickly attains the prema of Lord Krishna. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a very intimate relationship with Sri Gadadhar. Actually, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes in one of his books that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is a manifestation of the energy of Sri Gadadhar Pandit. And we can understand that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, being the eternal associate of Srimati Radharani, shares this very intimate relationship with Gadadhar Pandit. So maybe we'll just speak a little now about Sri Gadadhar Pandit. We understand from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he appeared with these Shaktis, his energies, in the form of Panchatattva. And in the Panchatattva, we have Sri Gadadhar Pandit. And Sri Gadadhar Pandit is explained in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita to be Srimati Radharani. Gadadhar Pandit is not different from Srimati Radharani. So often the question arises that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna himself, and he appeared in the mood of Srimati Radharani. So Sri Gadadhar Pandit appeared as Srimati Radharani, and what function, what purpose did Gadadhar Pandit serve in terms of his relationship with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Understanding that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared as his Krishna himself in the mood of Srimati Radharani. And our Acharyas explained that the primary mood of Srimati Radharani is to give service to Krishna. And when she appeared as Sri Gadadhar, if she displayed the mood of Srimati Radharani, then that would invoke within Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu his mood as Lord Krishna. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one of the internal reasons he appeared was to experience the love of Srimati Radharani. He's Krishna himself, but appearing in the mood of Srimati Radharani. So if Gadadhar Pandit displayed that mood of Radharani, then that would have interfered with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's real purpose. So Gadadhar Pandit, although being Srimati Radharani, she played a different role. She played a different role. And what was that role she played? It is explained in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that the activities of Sri Gadadhar Pandit, actually Sri Gadadhar Pandit appeared 1 year after the appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in the youth, Sri Gadadhar Pandit and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was Nimai at that point in time, they used to spend all the time together. But the mood was different. Sri Gadadhar was very soft, very humble, and Nimai took the mood of being quite arrogant. So although they had many pastimes together, it was almost a conflict of moods. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, do not worry. Very soon, I will become just like you, Gadadhar. And we know Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu experienced his transformation. And Sri Gadadhar and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they were inseparable. And Sri Gadadhar Pandit, when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas and went to Jagannath Puri, then he also followed Mahaprabhu. And Mahaprabhu actually instructed Gadadhar Pandit to take Kshetra sannyas, meaning he should never leave Jagannath Puri. So Gadadhar Pandit stayed in Jagannath Puri following the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave 2 instructions to Gadadhar Pandit. The first is to worship the deity of Gopinath. And secondly is to read and present Srimad Bhagavatam. And our Acharyas explain that this instruction of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for Sri Gadadhar Pandit to present Srimad Bhagavatam is very significant. Why is it very significant? Because if we ask the question, who understands Srimad Bhagavatam the best? Who has the highest understanding of Srimad Bhagavatam and the verses of Srimad Bhagavatam? In our tradition, we normally say it's Shukadev Goswami. That this Bhagavatam, after being touched by the lips of Sri Shuka, it's become even more sweet, more relishable. Just like the mango touched by the lips of a parrot becomes more relishable, this Srimad Bhagavatam, touched by the lips of Shukadev Goswami, has become most relishable. And we understand that Shukadev Goswami is a servant of Srimati Radharani. So coming back to the point is that the the best understanding of Srimad Bhagavatam comes from Srimati Radharani. No one understands Srimad Bhagavatam better than Srimati Radharani. Because, as Srila Prabhupada says, every word in Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna. There's no word, there's not a syllable in Srimad Bhagavatam that does not explain Krishna. And no one understands Krishna better than Srimati Radharani. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gave this instruction to Sri Gadadhar Pandit to worship the deity of Gopinath. And this Gopinath deity is the same deity we go to in Jagannath Puri, which is Toto Gopinath, the deity into which Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu entered in his concluding pastimes. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he had confidential associates, Ramananda Rai, Swarup Damodar, and they used to serve Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But every day, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had the practice of wanting to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. And he would hear Srimad Bhagavatam daily together with Gadadhar Pandit. And they would hear Srimad Bhagavatam and they would weep. They would weep, relishing Srimad Bhagavatam together. There's one pastime with Srinivas Acharya. It is explaining that Srinivas Acharya, he wanted to meet Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And at one point in time, he set off from Bengal to Jagannath Puri. But while on his way to Jagannath Puri, he received news that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had left the planet. And he was completely devastated. He felt like his whole purpose in life was finished. And he was feeling, completely stricken with grief. And it said at that point in time, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared in his dream. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, you go and study Srimad Bhagavatam under Sri Gadadhar Pandit. And by doing this, you will feel my presence. So please do not lament. And in this way, Srinivas Acharya, he went to Sri Gadadhar Pandit and he explains that to him that Mahaprabhu appeared in my dream and Mahaprabhu instructed me to hear Srimad Bhagavatam from you. And Sri Gadadhar Pandit said, yes, certainly. My instructions was to speak about Bhagavatam and to teach Bhagavatam. So certainly I'm very happy to discuss and teach you Srimad Bhagavatam. But he said there is one problem. I don't have a Bhagavatam. And Srinivas Acharya says, why? He says, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and myself, we would read Bhagavatam every day and we would simply weep. And the tears coming from our eyes would erode all of the ink. And now, none of this book is legible. So Srinivas was very taken aback. And he says, what to do? Can we get Bhagavatam? And then Sri Gadadhar Pandit said, you have to get a copy. So Srinivas Acharya went back to Bengal and he went through the process of finding a copy of Bhagavatam, then finding the leaves to have it written upon, and then finding the experienced people to copy the Bhagavatam. And eventually he managed to have the entire Bhagavatam compiled. And it's significant for us because we can see, today, if we want Srimad Bhagavatam, we just call Divyanam Prabhu and say, Divyanam Prabhu, can I please have a set of Srimad Bhagavatam? And before you know it, Bhagavatam is delivered. But previously, having Bhagavatam was not that easy. But Srila Prabhupada has now made Srimad Bhagavatam accessible throughout the entire world. And just continuing the pastime, so Srinivasacharya, he then went back to Jagannath Puri with his copy of Bhagavatam. And by the time he reached there, Sri Gadadhar Pandit had also left the world. So we understand that Sri Gadadhar Pandit, he appeared 1 year later than Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he left 1 year after Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it would have taken about a year to compile the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then he was distraught. Srinivasacharya was distraught because the instruction he received from Mahaprabhu. And then Sri Gadadhar Prabhu entered his dream and says, don't worry, Sri Rupa is in Vrindavan. If you go to Vrindavan, you can stay with Sri Rupa and then study with him. And in this way, the pastime goes on about Srinivasacharya wanting to study under the Goswamis, and although always he was a bit too late, these great personalities left, and eventually he found shelter under Sri Jiva Goswami, and he studied Srimad Bhagavatam under Srila Jiva Goswami. So Sri Gadadhar Pandit was the greatest authority on Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this way, it is significant that the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and Sri Gadadhar Pandit, we can see the connection on the disappearance day with Srimad Bhagavatam. And we can also see the deep connection both between Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and Sri Gadadhar Pandit. So I'd just like to spend the last few minutes coming back to contemporary times and the significance of Srimad Bhagavatam and the order that we are trying to fulfill of Srila Prabhupada. So many of you know that for many years, the distribution of Srimad Bhagavatam has been incidental. The distribution of Srimad Bhagavatam has never been on the bestsellers list in ISKCON. Although Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas wanted Srimad Bhagavatam to be distributed, and we know that Srila Prabhupada is on record as having said that he wants every home to have a full set of Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. So all of that changed, started to change when it was discovered that Srila Vyasadeva had his own way of making sure that Srimad Bhagavatam gets popularized and Srimad Bhagavatam gets widely distributed. And in the 12th canto, 13th chapter, 13th verse, Srila Vyasadeva had given a wonderful phalashtuti, a fruit, where is written, if on the full moon night during the month of Bhadra, one places Srimad Bhagavatam on a golden throne and gifts it, then that person will attain the transcendental destination in their next life. This is the phalashtuti of Srila Vyasadeva. How that would work, we do not know. It gives us no benefit to try to analyze how that benediction will work, but it's a benediction that's given. And we know that the mentality of the residents of Kali Yuga is that for a very small investment, people want great rewards. That is the mentality. Big return, small investment. So understanding that mentality, Srila Vyasadeva had given this phalashtuti. So taking that verse and that benediction, the devotee started what is called the Bhadra campaign and tried to popularize Srimad Bhagavatam just on that verse. And then, great results started to be realized. in that particular year, it's recalled that every year the BBT would get together and decide how many sets of Srimad Bhagavatam needs to be printed. And Vaisheshika Prabhu said, we should print 10,000 sets. And some of the trustees says, but we never distribute anything close to 10,000 sets. It takes us years to distribute. Bhagavatams are just sitting in our warehouse. But Vaisheshika Prabhu said, no, you print it. And through the launch of the Bhadra campaign in 2018, 7,000 sets of Srimad Bhagavatam was distributed. In 2019, it was a bit less, 6,500. And then 2020 came. And there was an even bigger printing of Srimad Bhagavatam. But then the pandemic struck. And all the traditional ways of book distribution and the traditional ways of distributing Srimad Bhagavatam was turned upside down. And devotees were thinking, how will we distribute Srimad Bhagavatam? But the devotees of the Lord are very determined, and they started to tax their brain. How to do? As Srila Prabhupada once said in a class, if we simply think the order of the spiritual master, how to do, simply by that thinking, we become liberated. What to say when we actually do? So the devotees applying their minds, how to do, even in the middle of the pandemic, they started to come up with novel ways to distribute Srimad Bhagavatam. And in 2020, at the beginning of the marathon, it was 5,000. Then it went to 10,000. Oh yes, we're close to reaching our goal. Then it went to 15,000, then 20,000. And finally, an unprecedented 24,195 sets of Srimad Bhagavatam were distributed. Unprecedented, and no one thought that this could ever be replicated. Because as we know, there's a saying, you pluck the ripe fruits first. It's easy to pluck the ripe fruit, but after that, the ripe fruits are plucked, it's more difficult. You've got to wait for the other fruit. So many people were thinking, oh, we've now captured the ripe fruit in this wonderful achievement of 24,000 sets of Srimad Bhagavatam. But no, Prabhupada's mood was, we should expand, we should think big. So in this year, the 125th appearance anniversary of Srila Prabhupada, the global goal is to distribute 25,000 sets of Srimad Bhagavatam. And every follower of Srila Prabhupada, every devotee in ISKCON, there's an appeal going out to them. Please try and do your bit to distribute a set of Srimad Bhagavatam. The worldwide goal is 25,000. Europe's goal is a very small fraction of that 1,000 sets. And Bhaktivedanta Manor's goal towards that contribution of 1,025,000 is 400 sets. And how do we get to 400 sets? The philosophy for book distribution at Bhaktivedanta Manor has always been a little from a lot. Instead of a few devotees really breaking their backs and sometimes burning themselves out, if every devotee does a little, then we can achieve great goals in book distribution. So we set out earlier this year to try to enroll 400 members of our community to sign up to either try to distribute, take, sponsor, gift, or distribute one set of Srimad Bhagavatam. And our goal was, by today, the auspicious disappearance day of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and Sri Gadadhar Pandit, we would have 400 devotees from our community. And we've been trying to reach out to various devotees. Unfortunately, the take-up has not been that great. To date, we have 129 devotees who have signed up. Some devotees have stretched themselves, and instead of saying one, they will distribute 10. And we have a commitment to try to distribute 325 sets so far. So we've got commitments for 325. And of those 325, believe it or not, the greatest contribution has come from the children. The children have made a commitment to distribute, try to distribute 51 sets of Srimad Bhagavatam. So the children are really leading the way. In one sense, they're putting to shame the adults. This is an humble appeal we've got from the Sankirtan team of Bhaktivedanta Manor. Dear devotees, on this auspicious day of the disappearance of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who wanted the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and we understand that the message of the Bhagavatam is the philosophy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They're non-different. So we are reaching out to devotees to please get involved. We have a special feature this year. We have a new set that's been printed, a new set of Srimad Bhagavatam. And this set is been printed in Germany, very high quality print. It's of an ideal size. I'm not sure if you'll have the new Krishna book. It's the same size as the new Krishna book. It's at the most affordable price of £175. And we are appealing devotees, to take this new Srimad Bhagavatam sets, to distribute this new Srimad Bhagavatam sets. And this set also comes with the full ebook. The full ebook is downloadable, and you can sync it together with your normal reading. And we have special events taking place this year to, a lot of people may feel that, yes, I want to take up this challenge. I understand the desire of our previous acharyas. I understand the desire of Srila Prabhupada, but distributing 18 volumes is a bit intimidating. So dear devotees, we have different events. We have training sessions where we have gained experience. We try to share that with devotees. So please become part of that. We also have presenters, experienced presenters will be presenting twice a week. You can tap into that. We plan to run various events. We're having a seminar, how to raise children in the culture of the Bhagavad. We had a seminar 3 years ago, was very successful. We have a special Bhagavad Katha event. We're screening a beautiful movie made by Krishna Kshetra Swami about the culture of the Bhagavad. If everything willing, we also plan to have a book fair showcasing Bhagavatam and other Srila Prabhupada's books. We will have a stall at Janmashtami. We're also thinking of having a yagya to attract people. And then there will be the big yagya, as we did last year at Naimisharanya, where anyone who takes Bhagavatam or sponsors Bhagavatam for this Bhadra campaign, their name will be offered this Mahayagya in Naimisharanya taking place. So we invite everyone to please come forward, get your ticket for Goloka. Please become part of this Bhadra campaign. It's Srila Prabhupada's desire, and Srila Prabhupada did all of the hard work, so to speak, rising, sleeping only 2 hours a day, translating Srimad Bhagavatam, publishing Srimad Bhagavatam. We've just had the shipment of 1,200 sets of the new sets that have arrived in our Godan. 800 sets will be arriving shortly. And, seeing a warehouse full of books sitting there is not what the Gaudiya Vaishnavas do. The Gaudiya Vaishnavas shift literatures, and we would like everyone to become part of this effort. So we will share the contact details of how you can become involved in the chat button of today's Zoom class, so you can get the details. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to speak on this wonderful occasion and also present Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhu, I'll leave it for any questions or comments now.
Thank you so much, Vrindavan Chandra Prabhu, for your class. I'm sure everyone was inspired to hear about Lord Gauranga and Bhaktivinoda Thakur. In the beginning, you mentioned many points of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life and how Bhagavatam was related to his life, and especially to his the mentality encountered in his college the Western mentality he faced with, and how Bhagavatam was so heavy and stiff to those modern philosophers. You also mentioned something very beautiful, which was how to institutionalize prem, the hard and the soft way to institutionalize this movement. And Bhaktivedanta Thakur had a great contribution to that on the soft side by his literature. Even though he was not physically building so many centers, he laid down a foundation for the later generations of Gaudiya Vaishnava. And in this way, he was a pioneer. In this way, he was beginning what is today the worldwide community of Gaudiya Vaishnavas. So we do a lot to Bhaktivedanta Thakur. And later on, you mentioned about the relationship between Gaur and Gadadhar. You didn't went so much into it, but you mentioned the difference in the primary stage between Gaur and Nitai as Nam Sankirtan worship, and later on to Prem Sankirtan as Gaur Gadadhar. And you slightly mentioned to the topic of the inner mood of Radhika as, or the manifestation of Srimati Radhika as Gadadhar Pandit. So we are very thankful, and time is short. There's no questions, but nevertheless, we want to appreciate this. If I may, I would ask just a question that for me was very obvious. What is the difference? And you began to explain, but you didn't finalize it. What is the difference between the inner heart of Lord Chaitanya, the inner mood of Lord Chaitanya, and Lord Gadadhar, if both are manifestations of Srimati Radharani? If you could send some words, and I think we'll finish there.
Yes. Obviously, we know the mood of Lord Chaitanya. There's the external mood and the internal mood. Srila Prabhupada has given us a very unique understanding of the mood of Srimati Radharani. And that unique mood he calls and Gargamuni Prabhu spoke about it beautifully, how once in Africa, Srila Prabhupada explained to the devotees we should have the Radharani mood. And ultimately the mood of Srimati Radharani is to give pleasure to the Lord, to Lord Krishna. It is said that there is not a thought, there's not a breath, there's not an action of Srimati Radharani that's not directed towards giving pleasure to Lord Krishna. And we understand that Krishna feels great pleasure when souls come back to him. And Srimati Radharani's mood is not to present herself, but to bring more devotees to serve Krishna. There's a wonderful story. Once Srila Prabhupada initiated a disciple, and he gave him the name Bhavananda. And he said Bhavananda means the bliss of the material world. So this devotee got this name, the bliss of the material world, and he started thinking to himself, Prabhupada is always telling us that this material world is a place of misery, is Dukkhailama Shashvatam. What type of name did he give me? The bliss of the material world. So he was perplexing him, and he said he has to ask Srila Prabhupada this question. So he went to Srila Prabhupada and he said, Srila Prabhupada, you always teach us that this material world is a place of misery, but you gave me a name, Bhavananda, and you said you explained it as the bliss of the material world. Please explain this to me. And Srila Prabhupada said, yes. He said the bliss of the material world means preaching. That Lord Krishna is feeling a great anxiety about how the conditioned souls are suffering in this material world. And they have an eternal relationship with the Lord. So when a conditioned soul is returned to Krishna via the medium of preaching, it brings great bliss to the Lord. And preaching only takes place in the material world. It doesn't take place in the spiritual world. So this word Bhavananda, it means preaching. So Srimati Radharani, her mood is to bring more and more people towards Krishna, so that Krishna can feel that happiness. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he also inaugurated the Krishna consciousness movement, the Sankirtan movement, and he gave, the process of Harinam Sankirtan to bring people. So the mood of Srimati Radharani and the mood of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and specifically today we spoke about the mood of Srimati Radharani in terms of the Gaudiya Vaishnava literature, and especially Srimad Bhagavatam, that she's the most qualified person to understand and give Srimad Bhagavatam, and that's the mood of Gadadhar Pandit. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, of all the literatures, Srimad Bhagavatam is the topmost.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. That was quite clarifying, and surely everyone will feel inspired. So devotees, you better pick up your phones and write on your message. The contact is on the chat, so you can serve Srimati Radharani, help us distribute these Bhagavatam sets, and surely many devotees will increase, and many devotees will also be happy. I would like to thank you for your presence here, to everyone, and especially to Vrindavan Chandra Prabhu, who take the effort and time to explain to us the glories of these great acharyas. Vrindavan Chandra Prabhu ki jai.
Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyascha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Premanande.
Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you, Vrindavan Chandra Prabhu. Wonderful class.
Thank you very much. Lovely class.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everybody. Hari Bol.
Everybody, Hare Bol.
Prabhupada.